Look, I know your shift just ended and you probably have your coat on already, but you need to sit back down and pull your chair in, because management just flagged a massive level 4 chronological deviation in Western Europe, specifically June 1791, and it is a total administrative disaster. The local variant, King Louis XVI of France, is currently trying to execute a high-stakes, middle-of-the-night stealth escape plan from his own country, and the problem is that he is attempting to do this using a solid gold luxury carriage moving at roughly 2 miles an hour. Grab a fresh coffee and open up the tracking software on your terminal, because we need to map this out before this guy completely deletes his own monarchy and accidentally plunges the entire continent into a 20-year multi-million casualty warfare loop. To understand why this royal variant is currently panicking in the back of a wagon, we have to pull up the baseline system parameters for France over the last few decades. The country is completely bankrupt, the treasury is running on absolute zero, and the local peasant population is violently furious because the price of a single loaf of bread now costs. Years ago, the system crashed hard, the locals stormed the Bastille prison, and they essentially placed the entire royal family under high-security house arrest inside the Tuileries Palace in Paris. For 2 years, Louis has been pretending to cooperate with the new revolutionary government, signing documents, nodding along and smiling for the cameras, but behind closed doors, his wife, Marie Antoinette, has been orchestrating a massive, top-secret continental prison break. The plan they cooked up on paper was actually incredibly solid and should have bypassed our timeline sensors entirely if they had just followed the manual. The goal was to slip out of the palace gates in the dead of night using fake passports, ride a series of fast, discreet, lightweight carriages out of Paris, push hard for the northeastern border, and hook up with a massive vanguard of royalist military forces waiting for them at Montmédy. From there, Louis could rally foreign armies from Austria, march right back into Paris with heavy artillery, and restore absolute power. It is a classic, high-probability execution strategy, except for one glaring system vulnerability, which is that King Louis XVI insisted on micromanaging the entire logistical operation. When you are trying to sneak the most famous family on the planet out of a city surrounded by armoured revolutionary guards, the first rule of stealth is to blend into the background noise of the simulation. The organisers told Louis to split the family up into 2 separate, incredibly common, fast-moving 2-horse-light carriages that could fly down the dirt roads undetected. Louis looked at that instruction and said, absolutely not, because a king does not ride in a cramped common commuter vehicle. Instead, he commissioned a custom-built, monstrously oversized luxury coach called a Berline. This thing was the 18th century equivalent of a massive, stretched-out armoured limousine painted in bright, conspicuous colours. It required 6 to 8 massive heavy draft horses just to pull its weight. It was loaded with a literal velvet-lined wine chest, customised leather upholstery, a silver dinner service set, and a portable commode so the royal family wouldn't have to experience the indignity of stepping outside to use a public restroom. It was so heavy and unwieldy that it stood out like a neon sign against the dark, muddy roads of rural France, and its maximum speed was practically a crawl. This is the exact moment on your terminal where you can see the system latency start to spike into the deep red. The escape gets delayed right out of the gate on the night of June 20th because it takes hours just to sneak the family members out of the palace one by one past the guards, and Marie Antoinette actually gets lost in the dark, winding side streets of Paris for an hour because she has never walked through the city on foot like a normal human being. By the time the massive gold carriage finally clears the city gates and hits the open highway, they are already 3 full hours behind their master schedule. Now, out on the open road, any normal fugitive would be whipping the horses, sweating through their clothes and praying for anonymity, but Louis was completely detached from the reality of his own simulation. Because the carriage was moving so slowly and the weather was beautiful, the king kept ordering the driver to pull over so the family could stretch their legs, walk up hills to enjoy the scenic countryside views, and eat casual gourmet lunches on the grass. Every single stop they made added more latency to the timeline, and the massive royalist military cavalry units that were stationed at various checkpoints along the route to protect them started getting incredibly nervous. See, the military commanders had timelines to keep too, And when the king didn't show up at the designated hours, the local peasants in the villages started noticing hundreds of heavily armed, foreign-looking soldiers just sitting on horses in the middle of their towns, doing nothing. The locals started whispering, rumours of a royal coup began spreading like wildfire, and the military commanders, fearing a massive peasant uprising, panicked and ordered their cavalry units to retreat and abandon their post. So, as King Louis's massive slow-motion party bus finally crawls into the small towns along the route, the security details that were supposed to protect them are completely gone. And that brings us directly to the small, unassuming village of Sainte-Menehould, where we meet the ultimate glitch in Louis's master plan, a local postmaster named Jean-Baptiste Drouet. Drouet is an ex-soldier, a fierce supporter of the revolution, and a man who takes his job of checking passports and managing horse relays very seriously. The massive luxury carriage pulls up to Drouet's station to swap out their exhausted horses for fresh ones, and Louis, feeling completely safe because they are far away from Paris, casually sticks his head out of the velvet curtains to chat with the locals and see what's going on. Drouet walks up to the window to collect the travel papers, looks at the man inside, and instantly gets a massive wave of cognitive dissonance. The passport says this man is just an ordinary low-level traveling merchant named Monsieur Durand, but Drouet looks at the man's distinctive, prominent bourbon nose, looks at his legal documents, and then looks down at the official revolutionary paper currency sitting right inside his own leather wallet. See, France didn't have digital identity tracking back then, but they did have one very effective piece of visual biometric data, which was that the king's face was literally engraved on every single piece of legal money circulating through the entire economy. Louis had spent his whole life plastering his own portrait on every coin and note in the kingdom as a display of absolute vanity, and now he had just handed his own face straight to the guy responsible for checking IDs at a border crossing. It is an absolute administrative disaster. Drouet doesn't say a word to the carriage crew. He just nods, pockets the money, steps back into the shadows, and watches the massive wagon slowly roll out of town toward the next stop, which is a tiny village called Varennes. Drouet jumps onto his fastest horse, takes a secret, muddy shortcut through the dark woods, and completely outruns the heavy royal carriage, arriving in Varennes a full half hour before the king. He storms into the local tavern, alerts the town officials, rouses the local National Guard units out of bed, and they quickly drag a massive wooden cart filled with furniture and barrels directly across the main bridge, completely blocking the only exit route out of the town. When the royal carriage finally lumbers into Varennes around midnight, the family discovers to their absolute horror that the fresh relay horses they were expecting aren't at the station because the military detail abandoned them, and as they try to navigate the dark, confusing streets, they are suddenly surrounded by local townspeople holding lanterns, muskets, and pitchforks. The local authorities force the family out of the carriage and march them up a cramped flight of wooden stairs into the back room of a local grocery store owned by a man named Sauce. For hours, Louis tries to play dumb, repeating his cover story that he is just an ordinary merchant trying to get to the border, but the locale townspeople aren't buying it. Finally, a local judge who had actually spent time in Paris and met the king face to face is brought into the grocery store to make a definitive identification. The judge walks up the stairs, enters the room, drops to his knees and exclaims, "Ah, sire, the game is officially over. The simulation has caught the error." The next morning, a massive, angry vanguard of 10,000 armed National Guards arrives in Varennes, surrounds the luxury coach, and forces the royal family to begin a grueling 4-day slow-motion march of shame all the way back to Paris. The return journey was an absolute psychological nightmare for the monarchy. The roads were lined with hundreds of thousands of local peasants who refused to take off their hats as the carriage passed, which was the ultimate sign of disrespect back then, and the crowd kept screaming obscenities, throwing mud and spitting at the windows. This single, spectacularly botched escape completely deleted any remaining public trust or mystical reverence the French people had for their sovereign. Before this night, the locals generally believed that the king was a good man who was just being misled by evil advisors, but after he tried to skip the country, to breed a foreign invasion against his own citizens. He was viewed as an absolute traitor, a liar, and a criminal. This event is the direct, unskippable catalyst that forced the revolutionary government to abandon the concept of a constitutional monarchy entirely, put Louis on trial for high treason, and march him straight up the wooden steps to the guillotine just a year later. The entire fabric of European history fractured over a wrong turn, an oversized carriage, and a portrait printed on a piece of pocket change. The incident report for June 1791 is officially processed, the data blocks are secure, and the timeline is fully stabilized. You can finally log out of your terminal, sign your weekly timesheet, and leave the station. I will see you back at your desk for the next shift.